Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kirby, and thank all y'all for having me today. I'm Will Mixon. I work in the Office of State Planning and Budgeting for the state of Colorado. I work in the economic revenue and forecasting team. And so we produce the quarterly forecast of revenue for the state. And one of my focus areas is the energy markets, severance tax, and different oil and gas revenue streams. So getting into it here, the discussion topics for the day, we will kind of focus on the global and domestic landscape and outlook for energy, state and oil and gas market, as well as some short to medium term expectations, economic expectations, and we'll get into the different revenue streams, both for the state and local governments. So kicking it off here, kind of the headline coming out of 2023 is that the U.S. broke the domestic annual crude oil production record set in 2019. After it fell off during the pandemic, it made a slow rise back, and over the past couple of years, it's kind of picked up and broke the record in 2023. Natural gas as well broke the production record as it has for the past few years. So we've been seeing some increases there. Crude oil jumped 8.5% production-wise over 2022 and about 5% over the previous 2019 record. That translates to about 12.9 million barrels per day. And then natural gas is about 4.2% over the previous record set the prior year. And so one thing you'll notice here on this slide is that for quite most of this time series, Colorado and the U.S. kind of kept a similar trajectory as far as growth in production went. You've seen that kind of separate since the pandemic, and we'll get a little bit more into that here shortly. So a big piece of that strong domestic production, it really came in handy as OPEC and Russia made production cuts over 2023. The U.S. really ramping up domestic production created an equilibrium in the market that otherwise would have been forcing prices upward as they were in 2022. As you can see here on this chart, the yellow bars represent the OPEC production growth year over year, and the dark blue is the U.S. So you can see in 22, basically across the board, we saw a lot of production growth as prices rose. In 23, you see and in 24, in the current year, those OPEC production cuts, and the U.S. Picking up a lot of the slack, and the other countries in the light blue, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, those countries are also saw some significant production increases this past year. OPEC is also continuing their production cuts here in the second quarter of 24, so we'll continue to see how that plays out. Regardless of that, over 23, you never really saw the price jump. As we kind of get into this next slide here, there really was a lot of stability in the price in a relative sense as far as crude oil goes, certainly compared to 2022. And that's shown there on the left side. On the right side, you have the natural gas prices over time. And so the one thing you'll see there on the natural gas price, of course, is they are well below average. That record production alongside with lower demand, having a mild winter, not only in 23, but also in 22 as well, has led to the storage inventories really increasing. And so there's really a supply glut of natural gas across the board. Right now, about 39% above the 5-year average. So those prices are low and expected to continue to stay low for quite a while. On the oil side, it's remained above the 10-year average shown there, but there has been some more stability. Goldman Sachs has released a report that they think that there's a risk premium in the oil prices of about $5 to $10, and so a lot of like what you're seeing that is above the average is from that risk premium. That's to combat against the geopolitical risk and if there were any supply constraints going forward. So there's some of that built into that price as well. And you saw that there wasn't a whole lot of price response to this past weekend with the attacks in Israel. Really didn't see a whole lot of crude oil response, and I think there's a lot of the risk premium, and a lot of that is already priced in. Of course, those risks are still there for upward price pressure. So just getting into kind of the proportional growth numbers over the past few years. And so this kind of shows the percentage growth year over year with Colorado and the U.S. And so this kind of gets back to that separation I was mentioning in that earlier slide between the U.S. and Colorado. Here you can see that over the mid-2010s and late 2010s, Colorado on the crude oil side on the left really grew at a higher rate than the U.S. in percentage terms. But since the pandemic, it's actually has not kept pace with U.S. growth, which of course is mainly led out of the Permian. On the natural gas side, it's always Colorado has always kind of lagged U.S. growth there, and so we're kind of continuing to see that trend. However, 21, 22, we're seeing even more of a difference in that lag, and so that's kind of where we're seeing that trend be bucked. So this slide here shows the state rankings in crude oil production. So we have 2023 numbers. Colorado came in at fourth, so at about 167 million barrels produced. That's about 4.1% of domestic production, excluding offshore, just using the states. Of course, Texas is about 50% of domestic production. New Mexico at 16.5%. North Dakota, third. So then on the natural gas side, Colorado ranked ninth at about 4% of statewide, of domestic production. Texas again was number one, except in the natural gas side there is a more dispersion of production across the Marcellus, Permian, Haynesville basins that kind of spread it around a little bit more. So Pennsylvania is the second highest producer at 17%, Louisiana at 9% with the Haynesville basin there. So Colorado ninth for 23. So where did the domestic growth come from to reach those production records in 2023? It's not a big surprise. It's a lot of the similar states you saw from the previous slide, but with Texas and New Mexico kind of leading the way in production growth. But Colorado is another piece of that. They are sixth there. That does include offshore as well on the crude oil side. And then on natural gas, seeing Texas, New Mexico, West Virginia kind of lead the way there on the natural gas side. So getting into the county by county, so this shows where the crude oil production is by county. So obviously, Weld, dark red there, a lot of where the majority of crude oil production is concentrated. And then you have Adams there at 13 million, and orange from red to gray gets it's a less and less of production. And so you see there Arapahoe in yellow, and then and gray, of course, is no production. And then on the natural gas side again, you see a little bit more of a dispersion around the state. Weld is still the leader as far as natural gas production goes, but you see, of course, Garfield, where we are here, it's also leading as well, and you see a little bit more dispersion around the state. And so looking at, just in a different way, at crude oil production over time within the state, this kind of gives you a look at Weld and all the other counties. Weld is about 80% of statewide production this past year in 2023. It has seen some slow growth post-pandemic, and so that yellow bar has increased of other counties. Weld used to account for about 90% of statewide production. It's now at about 80%. As you see, Adams, Arapahoe, and Broomfield, kind of those counties have picked up production, and so we've seen a growing share in the yellow bar of other counties. And so just to look at that, of those other counties that have seen some increased production, we're seeing in Adams, Arapahoe, Broomfield. You see Adams really taken off post-pandemic, seeing a lot of increase there, as well as in Arapahoe and Broomfield. And so just in An interesting thing there is since 2019, there's been about 35 million barrels of production shed in Weld County in 23 compared to 2019. But we have seen some offsets from these other counties that have picked up production. So yeah, from 2021 to 23, Weld has seen about a 2 million barrel increase, and Adams and Arapahoe have seen about a 5 million barrel increase. Broomfield at 2.5 million. So we're seeing some of these other counties increase production, and that's kind of providing a buoy for a little bit more growth in the state than we would otherwise see. Then on the natural gas side, again, it just shows a bit more of that kind of dispersion around the state. Weld still accounts for the most at 46% of statewide production. It's really grown over the years, with a lot of that certainly coming on, some of that coming from the associated gas with increased oil production. Garfield still retains as the second highest producer. It's about 17% of statewide production. Montezuma at 13%, and La Plata at about 10%. So looking at job growth in the oil and gas sector, obviously when the pandemic hit, there was a significant job loss across the state. And so since the pandemic, right before it hit, the jobs were about 26,000 in the sector. And now we're at around 22,000. Is that right? Yeah, 22,000. And so it hasn't reached the pre-pandemic levels. However, we have seen slow growth since the trough hit in the third quarter of 2020. About 2,500 more jobs in the sector since then. Of course, the all-time peak was back there in the latter part of 2014, before the shell bust, at about 36,000 jobs. And so what do we expect moving forward over these next couple of years? So this comes from the Energy Information Administration, so not forecast by Office of State Planning and Budgeting, but from the EIA. And so, yeah, so the first quarter, those are actual numbers at $77.50 for oil, a little over $2 for Henry Hub. So over these next few quarters, they expect oil in the $85, $86 range. That's about where we are now. Henry Hub to remain really below average, below $3. Basically over the course of the next couple of years, and with where inventories are, that's really not a big surprise. That's kind of it feels like it's almost baked in that it's really going to be difficult for Henry Hub to really pop. On the oil side, after they expect after it gets about 86 here in Q3 that it will begin a slow trajectory downward into the low 80s over the course of the next year. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty around geopolitical risk and others that could really shape this trajectory in different ways. There's also uncertainty around global demand as well. As if global demand weakens, we could see prices go lower, but those are kind of the upsides, the downsides, and this kind of probably somewhere shakes out in the 80s range. On the production side, EIA expects the U.S. to beat the crude oil production record again this year at 13.2 million barrels per day, and in 25 as well. So expecting to see growth there. On the natural gas side, expects it to basically be flat this year, tick down some from the 23 levels. It's no big surprise with where prices are on the natural gas side, and then to increase in 25. And so for Colorado, on the production side, we are expecting statewide oil production in 2024 to range from about 2 to 5%. That kind of tracks similarly with where the U.S. is expected. There over the final 6 months of 23, statewide production was 6.9% year-over-year growth, and so pretty good growth there. In January, there was growth as well. So we're expecting to see some slow growth to continue this year. And so then looking at natural gas, we've seen 3 years of declines now in the state on the production side. We expect it to be relatively flat this year. Could be slightly positive, slightly negative, but somewhere around 0% growth. although, over the final 6 months of 23, we did see some growth, and we saw some in the first month in January of 24. So, it probably will be slightly one way or the other. It's just going to be very difficult with where prices are, although we expect it to be buoyed by associated gas production. We think that will at least provide some production support as crude oil remains profitable. And then finally, to that point on profitability, so this comes from the Federal Reserve, the 10th District, which includes Colorado, Oklahoma, parts of New Mexico as well. So it's not perfectly for Colorado production, but it gets us somewhere around there. So in the most recent quarterly survey they have the break-even price at $64 per barrel for crude oil, $84 to substantially increased drilling. So because we're kind of expected to be pretty much in that range, over the next couple of years, we expect production to be healthy, growth, but not expected to really pop up. Of course, if prices go above 84, we may see some of that. On the Henry Hub side, 312 for break even. We're nowhere close to that right now, and so yeah, that's the main reason why we don't have a whole lot of confidence in natural gas production jumping up. Of course, as I always say, I'm sitting behind my computer in Denver looking at this stuff. A lot of people here know a lot more than me, are on the ground and seeing more. So happy to, as we're here these next couple of days, please reach out and we can have some great conversations about this. That's kind of how we're expecting things to play out these next couple of years. So getting into the revenue side now. So I have a few slides here. So basically this kind of gets, after we walk through some of those economic expectations, what the landscape looks like, what we're expecting the outlook to be, where does that land us on these different oil and gas revenue streams? So starting with severance tax, we reached a record high in FY23 at $375 million. That was remitted to the state. That beat the previous record set in FY 2009, $337 million. So as you can see, the orange line shows the average there, and you can really see the volatility of severance tax revenue. Now, no surprise in a volatile market, but also the state tax structure as well creates some volatility too. So you see that the average is what it is, but it can go all over the place. But in the current fiscal year and next 2 years, we do expect revenue to come down from the record high we just saw, but we do expect it to remain above average. We think that elevated oil price floor, as OPEC is committed to maintaining cuts to keep the price at an elevated level. We think that, and production is kind of seeing that slow growth. We think that the oil price floor is pretty high, and so we think that over the next couple of years, we will see some above average revenue collections, but not quite as high in spite of those lower natural gas prices. And so where is severance tax distributed? The revenue Department of Natural Resources receives 50% of that revenue to water projects and to other departmental programs. Department of Local Affairs, 70% of this revenue is allocated to local governments impacted by extraction through grants and loans, and 30% of that is it goes to a direct distribution. There is a new allocation for severance tax that was passed in the 2023 legislative session to fund the decarbonization tax credit administration, and so that bill was there was tax credits related to green energy initiatives and things like that, and so that funds part of that administration of that program. Federal mineral lease, similar to severance, had a very strong FY23 at $174 million. However, the federal mineral lease revenue is more reliant on natural gas swings compared to severance. About 50% of the revenue in federal mineral lease comes from natural gas, 25% oil, and then the other 25% is actually from coal and carbon dioxide. So it's a little bit more reliant on natural gas, so we expect it to drop to average to below average levels as we're seeing a little more weakness on that side. 50% of the non-bonus revenues allocated K-12 schools for this revenue source, 40% to DOLA for grants and direct distribution, and 10% to the Colorado Water Conservation Board. State Land Board revenue, another important oil and gas revenue stream. About 2/3 of that chart, about 2/3 of that revenue that goes to state land board comes from oil and gas royalties and rentals. And so saw a record year in FY23, kind of a broken record, like for FY23. Mainly almost all the records on oil and gas revenue streams were broken. For this revenue source, half of this revenue is funds capital construction in public schools. It goes to the Building Excellent Schools Today program and is allocated out to school districts on a grant-based program. And then about the other half goes to the Public School Permanent Fund, which funds a portion of K-12 schools each year. And then finally, final revenue source here is, and this one is a big one and goes to local governments, is oil and gas assessed values and property taxes. So the assessed value for oil and gas hit another statewide record high in tax year 23. 23.7 billion, and that's nearly 3 times the recent trough reached in tax year 21. And so at that local level where oil and gas is prevalent, this property tax revenue provides revenue to school districts, city and county governments, special districts, and junior colleges. So this saw a very significant bump in tax year 23. Again, expect that to come down some. That tax year 23 was assessed over 2022, so kind of at the height of the market in price on the price side. So we expect that to come down some. With that, that kind of is the high-level overview of where we're seeing oil and gas economics in the state, nationally, as well as how that plays out onto the revenue side for state and local revenue. Overall, we've seen really high oil and gas revenue into the state and local governments over the past couple of years. High level, we expect that to come down some over the next in this year and the next year, but still remain healthy as production remains on the crude oil side remains healthy, as prices maintain a pretty good floor on the oil side as well. So that concludes my presentation. I have an appendix here with some resources that may be of usefulness to you. And other than that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.